A fungus can attack another fungus. A fungus can attack a tree.
Fungus can turn you into a zombie. Can a spore just like last indefinitely through fire, wind, air, water?
Yes, a lot of them can just go dormant for a very long period of time. You can get very sick if you eat it. You can get like really bad diarrhea.
Hey everybody, I'm David from Black Forest Mushrooms, and I'm sitting here with...
Bree.
From?
Black Forest Mushrooms.
All right, while I know more than the average bear, I don't know a lot of the scientific stuff. I've only been foraging once, right? Like, these are new areas for me, and so I'm really excited to sit down and get a chance to talk to you, because you are, for all intents and purposes, like the expert in the building right now. Why don't we start by you telling me a little bit about your background, how you got into this whole wacky world of mushrooms, and kind of what brought you to where you are now.
What got me interested in mushrooms was I started out just as a hiker. I was a vegetarian at the time and heard that edible mushrooms grow in our forests. Once I started reading into it, as it turns out, a lot of edible mushrooms grow in our forests, and a lot of them resemble like meat-like textures. Like I heard about this one mushroom called like chicken of the woods, which had like a chicken-like consistency to it, and that just blew my mind. The only thing I had ever heard of were like the little button mushrooms at the grocery store. So while I was out hiking, I started looking at the different mushrooms to try and see if I could find some of these edible ones, and as it turns out, the forests are filled with mushrooms. There's so many mushrooms out there. So I was a little bit overwhelmed in the beginning. I told myself if I could study mushrooms for a year, then I'd go out and start like foraging for edibles, because as it turns out, there are also a lot of mushrooms that can make you very sick or even kill you if you eat them.
I think the first time I remember like consciously understanding that mushrooms were a thing is when I was a little kid. I think the book was my first exposure to it, but Babar, you know, the elephant. It's bananas to me how many people work at Black Forest Mushrooms, and I seem to be the only person who knows about Babar. But Babar is a French children's story about a colonist elephant in Africa. It's a whole thing. The point is that the first couple of pages of that book, Babar's grandfather, dad, somebody, a close member of the family, goes out into the woods, eats a mushroom, and dies. That's like page one. My first like conscious understanding of mushrooms was that they would kill you. And I think a lot of people in the US kind of carry that baggage.
That mycophobia.
Mycophobia.
Mm-hmm.
So that was your goal, and I'm assuming that you completed that goal. You studied for a year and then you...
I did. I actually waited more than a year, because the more I learned and the more I studied, the more I realized I was more interested in learning about these mushrooms than I was actually eating the mushrooms.
I'd be remiss not to bring this up. Maybe it's a little too early to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up. The first mushroom that you cited by name in this conversation was chicken of the woods. I know your most recent experience with chicken of the woods, but I don't think anybody else does. Brianna, what happened to your leg?
So this was a chicken of the woods incident.
They're that poisonous.
In the beginning of September, the kickoff of foraging season here in the Pacific Northwest, I went out mushroom hunting. Up on an old dead hemlock was this beautiful chicken of the woods, Laetiporus conifereicola. Checked the area for bald-faced hornets, because they're very common in the woods right now. Didn't see any. Climbed up, started taking photos, started getting stung on the rear end, and then booked it off of the log and landed on the ankle and broke it.
You landed like, if I remember the original telling of the story, you landed like in like a gymnast pose, right?
Yeah.
Like on one leg.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So chicken of the woods will break your bones, is what I'm taking.
Or more just like I'll do anything for the mushrooms. Like,
okay.
I'm committed.
So years and years ago, I took a hunter's education class, and one of the things, not mushroom hunting, just pheasant hunting, I think was the class, and We drilled really into habitat, kind of signs to where pheasants are going to congregate and where they're going to hide out, and where they're going to feed. And I'm assuming the same sort of principle applies to mushrooms. They require specific things.
Exactly.
I could be more articulate.
Exactly. So I was up in the Cascades in an area with some of the older growth forests. That is where chicken of the woods likes to grow, on the old dead hemlocks, which is also a place that the bald-faced hornets like to build their nests.
So when I'm looking for chicken of the woods, I should also be on the lookout for hornets. Mm-hmm. All right.
Yep.
Good to know. And I don't even like chicken of the woods that much, so I don't know that I'm willing to fight a hornet over them.
Have you had it when it's just a little baby nugget, when they're very fresh?
I haven't, no.
That's when they're the best.
Okay. So that leads into like an interesting discussion, like the taste and texture. I know with like the mushrooms we grow here at Black Forest Mushrooms, the blue oyster and the lion's mane, that when they're in early stages of growth, we love to look at them, and they're very, like, the blues are very vibrant blue, and the lion's manes are a little pink. But depending on when we harvest them, they have slightly different tastes and textures. So like that to me makes me think that there's like a whole life cycle of the mushroom that changes various properties. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about the life cycle of a mushroom?
The mushroom life cycle starts with a spore, and you can think of a spore as kind of like a seed, and it holds all of the genetic information of the mushroom. Once a spore is in the right environment, it'll start growing hyphae, which is kind of like little hair-like strands or threads, which then turns into mycelium. Mycelium is the actual body of a fungus. If you've ever like lifted up a dead log and seen a bunch of little white threads underneath, or kicked over a bunch of dead leaves and saw a bunch of little threads, that's actually the body of the mushroom.
I'm gonna get this wrong, but I've heard that in the Pacific Northwest, there's like the largest living fungal mycelium structure. Is that?
That's correct. So that is the honey mushroom, or Amarilla species. I can't remember exactly how many miles that it covers, but one fruiting body that has continuously grown from basically like root to root. It's a parasitic fungus, unfortunately, so it's not mycorrhizal, it's not helping those trees, but it is helping break things down to help the life cycle of the forest.
We're talking about parasitic fungi. How many different types are there? Like parasites of?
So many. Like a fungus can attack another fungus. A fungus can attack a tree. A fungus can attack a plant.
Fungus can turn you into a zombie and be stretched out over 8 episodes when it only logically needed to be 3, or you could have just played the game in the first place, but you know, that's neither here nor there. Shots fired at Last of Us. Season 2 coming soon. What are the ideal conditions for the spore? Yes, it needs the nutrition in the growing medium, but like, can a spore just like last indefinitely through fire, wind, air, water, hearts, Captain Planet? Like what are we talking about?
It depends on the species.
Okay.
But yes, a lot of them can just go dormant for a very long period of time until they have the right conditions to be able to grow. When conditions are ideal, when it's time to fruit, when it's time to let its spores go, that's when it creates a little hyphal knot in the mycelium. And that's where a little mushroom's gonna grow out of. And that is the reproductive part of a mushroom body.
So you spent that time learning, and then you discovered that you liked learning more than you liked eating. And I respect that. I'm into it, that's great. I like eating. So what can I eat around here? In the Pacific Northwest, in Everett, Washington, the heart of the Pacific Northwest. Visit Everett.
Surrounding Everett, we've got the Cascades, are very close. One of my favorite mushrooms to find in the Cascades is the cauliflower mushroom, or Spiraceus. Have you ever seen one of those before?
I have. We had some in the shop like a couple weeks ago, but I've never seen them in the wild.
I call them noodles of the woods. because they just look like a big pile of noodles when you find them, but the consistency is just like a noodle and you can cook them up just like noodle. It's fantastic.
What's your favorite recipe with that?
My favorite was a pad ki mao using spirasus as the noodle base.
Do we have any cauliflower mushrooms left? Because I want to make that. All right, so we've got the cauliflower mushroom. Obviously, we've got the lion's mane that's around here too. Talk to me a little bit about the lion's mane.
So we've got a few different hericium species that grow around here. Lion's mane does grow, but it's more common on hardwoods and oak, which we don't have a ton of oak around here. I've seen it on big leaf maple before, but that was just on one occasion. You're more likely to find something called bear's head tooth, which grows on conifer, and that's very abundant in the Cascades. Coniferous trees are gonna have needles.
Oh, all right.
And then hardwood have like leaves.
I know in the spring we get boletes. Is that?
The bolete.
Boletes. See, like this is the problem. I'm not even gonna get into what the problem is.
I knew what you were saying. You don't have to, no one's ever gonna shame you for mispronouncing something.
Oh, you'd be surprised. I've worked a farmer's market. I do get shamed for not knowing it. Okay, so bear's head, lobster mushrooms. We're in the depths of fall right now. What else pops up during the fall?
We got chanterelles. We got the hedgehog mushroom. Hedgehogs are one of my favorite edibles. Very sweet and very nutty. Yellow feet.
As a layman who does not work at a mushroom farm, I didn't know that there was more than one kind of chanterelle.
It's not technically a chanterelle. That's just one of the common names for it.
Okay.
It's also called yellowfoot. So the chanterelle is in the Cantharellus genus, and the yellowfoot is in the Craterellus genus. So they're in a different genus, but they look very similar. So as a nickname, people call it the winter chanterelle.
You touched on things looking very similar. What mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest, if I only pick up a book and I don't go out with a friend and I think I know what I'm looking at, which mushrooms are going to get me into trouble?
I would start with the mushrooms that are easier to identify.
Okay.
As opposed to the ones that'll get you in trouble, because then you're more likely to find like a look-alike or something. So mushrooms like the hedgehog are great because they have teeth as opposed to gills. So it's very easy to identify it. It's hard to mistake like teeth in a gill.
A gill is something that you would see like under an oyster mushroom.
Yeah, so that's gonna be underneath the cap typically, and that's gonna be the spore-bearing surface of the mushroom.
Okay. And then the teeth, when we're talking like lion's mane or bear's head, we're talking about those like little things that hang on.
Yeah, they kind of look like little icicles that are hanging down. The cauliflower mushroom, there are no other mushrooms that look like a cauliflower mushroom. Not many other mushrooms look like a big pile of noodles.
And now I'm going out and looking for, I think I know what's edible and what's not. What are the most commonly misidentified mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest?
Probably a chanterelle, one that people go out and forage for commonly, and it has 3 lookalikes, which is a Krugomphus, which has ridges, and the top of it is orange like a chanterelle. Its nickname is the scaly chanterelle, but you can get very sick if you eat it. You can get like really bad diarrhea.
Nobody's a fan of really bad diarrhea.
Pacific golden chanterelle is a commonly foraged mushroom around here that also has a few lookalikes. Turbinellus looks very similar. The first time I found it, I actually thought it was a chanterelle before I knew how to ID or anything. It has ridges underneath. The top is orange like a chanterelle, but then once you start to notice the details, it has scales on top. It has a hole in the top, so it's more like a vase And then it has ridges as opposed to forked gills.
If I'm out looking, obviously first rule of thumb is know exactly what I'm looking for. Probably go out with somebody who also knows exactly what they're looking for.
Always.
What are the biggest warning signs? Like, is there a way to look at a mushroom and go, well, that's gonna be bad if I eat that? Color or the...
Nope.
Nope, they're just any... Okay, so we get back to the, what did you call it at the beginning when I was talking about Babar? Mycophobia?
Mycophobia. But there are unique characteristics in every single mushroom that you can identify to make sure you have found the right mushroom.
Oh, okay. So with the chanterelle, how do you know you found the right chanterelle?
A chanterelle will have forked ridges as opposed to gills.
Okay.
It is a mycorrhizal mushroom, so it will always be growing with a certain type of tree. The color, it's got a nice like kind of yellow gold color. The top will be smooth. If you cut it in half, it'll be white on the inside and not hollow. Peel it like string cheese. So there's like, you know, like little
tells.
Exactly.
All right. And just to be clear, we're not giving identification advice right now.
Correct.
Yes.
I was kind of worried about that.
Yeah, no. I think it's important to say that we are not giving any identification advice. These are just kind of general guidelines, and always go out with somebody who knows what they're looking for. Make sure that you take a class. Make sure that you have a guide. Somebody learn from people who know.
Use all 5 senses besides tasting your mushroom to try and figure out what you have.
Tasting your mushroom should be like the last thing that you do, right? Because as we like to say here at Black Forest Mushrooms, every mushroom is edible at least once. All right, let's zoom out from kind of the anatomy and the life cycle. What's your favorite thing about mushrooms?
My favorite thing is there's so much to learn about them. The deep dive never ends. There's something for everyone when it comes to mushrooms. You can cook with them, you can grow them, you can use them and make art with them, you can take pictures of them. There's, you know, things like DNA sequencing now because there's so many different types of mushrooms, learning about all the different species and their unique role in the environment that they live in.
And you get to spend a lot of time outside.
Yeah.
If I'm getting into foraging, ideally I want to take a class. Ideally I want to go out with somebody, absolutely, at least the first couple of times, I should be going out with somebody who knows what they are doing. I like technology. I'm a tech nerd. Are there any apps or anything that I can have in my arsenal to make my mycological exploration more, yes, I'm setting you up for a line item on the...
Well, I get asked this question a lot. I think identification apps can be very useful. Me personally, I don't suggest them because a lot of them are brand new. And there are so many species out there that not a lot of them will give you the right information. What I usually suggest instead of just an identification app is something like iNaturalist. iNaturalist does have an identification feature. When you upload your photo, it'll give you suggestions, which I think is a great place to start. From there, then I'll go and pick up a book, read about different species, maybe go on a Facebook identification group and ask around. But I suggest using a lot of different resources to get your final ID.
I mean, there's so many different facets of mushrooms to learn about.
That's what I love about them, it never ends.
Yeah. What different types of things can I learn about mushrooms?
Depends on how far you want to go with it, which is the cool thing about them. It's really like how far you want to take them. There's mushroom cultivation, so growing mushrooms indoors, growing mushrooms outdoors. If you're a gardener, mushrooms are very beneficial for plants and soil. Culinary value, cooking mushrooms, identification, that's what I'm into, just nerding out about all the different mushrooms, what their unique role they play in their environment, whether they're a decomposer or a mycorrhizal mushroom that's helping support the plants around it. Even the parasitic mushrooms have a very special place because things do need to die and the cycle needs to continue and things need to be broken down.
I heard something about you can use mushrooms to like dye fabrics. What's that all about?
Dyer's polypore is a very common mushroom around here. It causes brown rot in trees, so it's a parasitic mushroom. So eventually the tree will die, but the mushroom that grows can be used to dye fabrics. It creates like a beautiful, vibrant gold color. You can also use lobster mushrooms to dye fabric. It creates kind of like a red-pink color.
I want to go back a little bit. Earlier, you started saying false chanterelles and you stopped yourself and you said, I don't want to say that. Why don't you want to say false chanterelles?
I don't want to say that because I feel like it puts these other species, these false chanterelles, in a box. Like, we could also call the chanterelle a false hygrophis.
What was your best find foraging?
My favorite find was actually a rare mushroom. It's not edible, no culinary value, can't dye with it, really can't do anything with it. It's called Bridgeoporus. It's a huge polypore that grows at the very bottom of old growth trees. So it requires an old growth forest to grow in, which we don't have a lot of those anymore because a lot of them have been cut down. So it was a very, very special find.
What's a polypore?
A polypore is a mushroom that grows like a shelf and has pores on the spore-bearing surface as opposed to gills.
Like a reishi or a turkey tail? Or...
Correct.
Okay. Hey, I knew something. Ah, yay. So Bree, you've got a bunch of books. Well, I have a bunch of books, but you brought them. I just want to hold these up and ask, what are these books good for?
Tree identification, very important in terms of mushroom identification. What I've learned is that foraging for mushrooms is actually foraging or looking for certain types of trees.
All right, so I'm not really mushroom hunting, I'm tree hunting?
Correct.
All right.
Mycorrhizal mushrooms have specific tree species that they'll associate with. So if you learn how to identify a certain type of tree, like a Douglas fir, that means that all you have to do is find the tree in the right environment and you should be able to find the mushroom that associates with that tree.
All right, so trees of Western North America, good source of tree identification. Now, I've got two books here that have very similar covers, and it looks like they're written by the same folks, Noah Siegel and Christian Schwarz. And I've got here Mushrooms of Cascadia and Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast. And this one's got a lot of your personal notes in it, and this one only has one note in it.
Mushrooms of Cascadia just came out.
Oh, okay.
Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast has been out for a couple years now. I've been using it for a couple of years, but that has been my go-to ID book for the Pacific Northwest because it has so many species, great descriptions, great pictures. I find species that I don't find in other identification books. Noah and Christian are awesome field mycologists, and they also give talks at a lot of the mycological clubs and highly suggest seeking them out for mushroom info.
On the cover it says a comprehensive guide to the fungi of coastal Northern California, but we're in Washington, and so you're using this book for Washington?
Oh yeah. A lot of mushrooms will have different species in their genus. Some you'll find in California, some you'll find in Washington. So the cool thing about these books is, well, one, a lot of mushrooms that grow in California also grow up here. If that species doesn't grow here, it has a comment section where it'll describe the species that you'll find in Washington state.
And Mushrooms of Cascadia says a comprehensive guide to fungi of the Pacific Northwest, and you said this one just came out. So I'm assuming this was the jumping off point into this, or?
Correct. And so yes, you'll find a lot more info on species in Washington in this book, which is very exciting, very excited about that. And then also everything's going to be up to date because with like DNA sequencing, they're discovering new species all the time, and old mushroom genuses that we thought were one thing based on just the way it looked, now we're discovering is something completely different. So we're having to like rename mushrooms all the time. So as soon as you learn something, it'll probably change.
Okay.
That's very common. So mushrooms of Cascadia is going to be up to date on all of the species that have been renamed due to DNA sequencing.
All right, cool. And you can also get them on blackforestmushrooms.com. Not this one yet, but this one, yes. What is somebody who's just getting into mycology? Where do they go? What do they do?
I suggest joining your local mycological society. There are a ton of mushroom clubs in most cities. Go online, just type in mycological club or mycological society, and you probably have one in your area. Usually they will have classes about mushrooms. They have like lectures and talks.
The Snohomish Mycological Society just had that wild mushroom show that we were at.
Exactly. Events. Black Forest Mushrooms is about to start hosting classes on cultivation and foraging.
I did not know that. Who's teaching those classes,
I'll
Brie?
be teaching those classes.
Excellent. And so we've touched on a lot of information today, and that information is going to be available in our classes, starting with Fungi Fundamentals, which is basically an introduction to mycology. Mushrooms of the Pacific Northwest, which we talked about a lot, kind of identification, not a foraging class specifically, but just kind of understanding what mushrooms are around us, right? Like, tell me a little bit about those classes that you got on deck.
We'll be doing Mushrooms of the Pacific Northwest, Fungi Fundamentals, and Home Cultivation 101.
Excellent, excellent. And that pretends that there's going to be a 102 or 201. I know how college works. I went to college. 101 means that there's going to be a 201 and a 301, right?
Correct.
Excellent. Okay. Join a mycological society, take a class, and if you're not nearby Black Forest Mushrooms, I'm sure there are classes in your area.
Get outside, boots on the ground. Like, get out and start looking for mushrooms. Take the time to stop and look at every mushroom you see on your walk to work in the morning.
If there's one thing that you wanted people who are interested in mushrooms and mycology to know, what would it be? No pressure.
You can touch any mushroom and it won't hurt you. There's no mushroom that will kill you by touching it. So touch every mushroom.
All right. That's a wrap.